Have you heard of the split personality disorder? It's a mental disorder where a person switches from one personality to another. It's as if there are two or more people living in the same head. They may do things that contradict each other. Now imagine that one moment they're a friend and in the next they're indifferent. This is what Ukraine is facing at the hands of NATO. Get this. Ukraine has all the political support of NATO countries, but when it comes to following up on words with deeds, NATO is divided. Ukraine has received commitments of billions and billions of dollars, but not all of these commitments have been fulfilled. When Ukraine asks for ammunition, it gets white noise. When it asks for advanced weapon systems, it gets reluctant responses. At a time when Ukraine needs their attention the most, it finds NATO leaders confused, reluctant, and lost. A complete letdown, in other words. This leaves us with the question, what is NATO's problem? Recently, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg called out member countries for not providing Ukraine with enough ammunition. He said that they are allowing Russia to push back on Kiev's forces. Ukraine is facing a crippling ammunition shortage. It is almost out of air defense missiles. Its forces are rationing artillery shells and other ammunition, which is a huge discouraging factor for soldiers who are up against a well-armed Russian army. But its allies are backing out. Military aid from NATO has dried up. From the US, all commitments and deliveries have essentially stopped. The last major commitment was made at the end of 2022. And the $46 billion allocated for Ukraine's military since 2022 have been used up. A new $60 billion aid package has remained stalled in the House of Representatives for weeks. Moreover, the Israel-Gaza war has distracted the US from Ukraine. Now it appears highly unlikely that any US military aid will flow into Kiev in 2024. This has sparked a leadership crisis in the NATO. No supply from the US for a whole year adds tremendous burden upon NATO's European members who face a very real possibility of filling in for the US. But this will mean that Europe will have to almost double its commitments of military aid. So is Europe ready for the task? Well, not so much. 19 out of 32 NATO members have not fulfilled their military spending quota of 2% of their respective GDP. Most of these laggards are in Europe, whose own weapon supplies are dwindling and not sufficient to defend itself. If Europe does not build the capacity to produce more firepower, it will have to direct its funds towards American defense contractors, which will drain its economy even more. Then there is a lack of European leadership. You see, the two biggest powers in the European Union, Germany and France, cannot stop feuding with each other. Here's what happened recently. French President Emmanuel Macron suddenly stepped up the rhetoric against Russia and suggested that he was considering the possibility of Western troops in Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz responded, saying that no such thing was on the cards. Soon after, Macron directly hit back at Scholz and said, Europe clearly faces a moment when it will be necessary not to be cowards. But Germany remains cautious, especially after its military officials were caught in a leaked audio discussing top-secret war plans. This was a major propaganda victory for Russia, which intercepted their conversations, revealing plans to use the Taurus cruise missile on the Crimean Kerch Bridge, a civilian target. Germany has since completely ruled out sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Now, while France has turned up the hawkishness towards Putin, this newfound posturing has annoyed other NATO allies. Macron may be playing with the idea of Western troops on the battlefield now, but German officials are actually miffed about the simple fact that France has not even sent nearly as much military aid to Ukraine as Germany. One look at their contributions and you'll find Germany's 17.7 billion euros in aid far exceeding that of France, whose contribution stands at 640 million euros. Moreover, the only major military donors in the NATO are Germany, the UK, and the Nordic countries such as Denmark and Norway. And their commitments are yet to translate completely into actual weapons on the ground. For example, Germany remains the largest European military donor, with a total, as I said, of 17.7 billion euros in military commitments. However, only 9.4 billion euros have now been allocated to specific military packages sent to Ukraine. This is simply not enough for Kiev. Other members continue to lag behind strikingly as well. Their words do not match their deeds. Ukraine is being served only with lip service while it faces a relentless enemy every day, an enemy that it was encouraged to fight with all its might and with NATO backing. So why are NATO members so reluctant to step up? Well, firstly, the greatest issue is the growing perception that Ukraine cannot win. Let's go back to February 2022. At the very beginning, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Western support poured in rapidly. The sentiment was different at this point. Soon it had become clear that NATO, led by the United States, was fighting this war indirectly. NATO members mobilized billions and billions worth of weapons and ammunition for Ukrainian soldiers. However, this flow of military aid began drying up in the early months of 2023 when Ukraine's much anticipated counteroffensive failed to make a dent in Russian lines. Instead, Russia took Bakhmut in the bloodiest battle the war had seen so far. Moreover, French military assessments say that Ukraine cannot win the war militarily. According to leaked classified documents, the French concluded in a report that NATO trained Ukrainians through 2022 to carry out the 2023 spring counteroffensive, but that force was severely crushed. The failed 2023 offensive tactically destroyed half of Kiev's 12 combat brigades. This is what the French report found. Now Kiev is struggling to mobilize more conscripts. It is failing to hold the line as seen in Avdiivka. While Moscow failed multiple tactical setbacks in 2022, it adapted to the situation quickly. Defense production in Russia took off on a war footing. Russia has even put Iran and North Korea to work. NATO was no match for Moscow's highly militarized economy. Then there were Russia's impregnable defense lines. Ukraine has neither cracked the code to beat these defensive lines, nor has it been able to mirror them. Then there are domestic troubles. Most European economies are troubled at this point. Germany is almost certainly in a recession. Europe's own militaries are facing rapidly depleting weapons stockpiles, and production capacity is no match for Russia's. And finally, there's Donald Trump. Because even if European members break this deadlock and muster up the political will to defeat Russia despite all odds, the chance of Trump winning the US presidency in the 2024 US election will crush their plans. Republican leaders have largely turned against aid for Ukraine, and Trump has hinted that he will cut off funding and end the war within 24 hours. So European leaders are in no mood to venture deeper into the war without assurance from the US. This leaves Ukraine in a peculiar position. The very allies that promised unrelenting support, and in the words of President Biden, for as long as it takes, are now backing out with a lack of unity and strategy, a host of excuses, confused messaging, and all-out unreliable behavior.